Hi, everybody. I'm Anne Choquette, CEO of TheLi.st. I'm very proud to have two members joining us today, Jen Fisher from Deloitte and Stella Grizont, author of The Work Happiness Method. It is fantastic to me that everybody wants to know how to be happier at work. Um, anybody, but maybe mute if you've just come in and can't hear you, or we can hear you, so we don't have to hear your background noise. Okay, anyway, so Stella, USA Today bestseller, amazing, congratulations. This is going to be a fantastic conversation. I am going to put into the chat, I'm going to put a link to, hold on, I'm going to keep muting people. I'm going to put a link for people to buy the book so that we can move that a little bit higher on the bestseller list. Maybe hit the New York Times bestselling list also,
Yes.
the Wall Street Journal list, all of those lists. So I'm gonna mute myself and let you two take it from here.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Anne. And just a quick reminder to everybody to check to make sure that you are muted so we can have the least number of distractions and background noise during this conversation. But great to be here with all of you. And Stella, it is so good to be here with you and Anne today to talk about a topic that is certainly near and dear to my heart. I think near and dear to everyone's heart, given the number of people that have showed up today to learn more about happiness and kind of in particular happiness at work, because I think so often, well, I think right now many of us aren't feeling happy at work, but I also think that reflecting on my own career, the number of people that told me we don't want people to be too happy at work. If people are too happy at work, then maybe we're doing something wrong. And so I want to dig into it, but first I want to hear about you, how you became passionate about this topic of helping people find happiness at work. Like, what does it mean to you? Because obviously you dove in and wrote an entire book about it.
Well, thank you both so much for having me here. I wrote this book. It all started because I was so miserable at work,
Mm,
and I cared so deeply for my work, and I yearned to succeed. I kept yearning for something, and I was working so hard to achieve. And even though I checked off all the boxes and achieved, whether it was like working in advertising or working in startups and helping women launch businesses, um, I kept finding myself feeling empty
mm,
and disoriented. And how did I land here again? And burnt out. And then I thought, okay, well, I'll launch my own business and control everything. And then therefore I will not burn out and I'll be fulfilled and happy. And of course,
uh-oh.
same thing happened. And so I tell the story in my book of how like I was just like digging in the Nutella jar with a tablespoon, curled up in a fetal position on my hardwood floor in my studio in Hell's Kitchen, and just like dripping with imposter syndrome, being like, how did I land here again? Right. And that helped me realize, oh, well, maybe it wasn't the clients I blamed or the leaders I blamed or the culture I blamed. Maybe it's been me all
Mm,
along. And not to say that from a blame perspective, but rather to see my own power. And so I realized somehow by the grace of God, I don't know how I had that insight instead of letting my inner critic just destroy me. But in that moment, somehow I recognized, oh, I had more power all along. I had more
mm.
choices all along. I just didn't take them. And so that's the genesis of the work happiness method, which is to where I realized we all have more control and we all have more power. And so how do we use it? And that's how it all started.
Yeah, so much about that resonates with me, but I want to level set and kind of bring everybody along on the journey of how exactly you define happiness at work. Because I think that that's an important place for us to start.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Happiness at work, I talk about it from a broader place. So it's in positive psychology, happiness is really a reflection of your general life satisfaction, um, and your experience of positive emotion. What I try to do in the book is make sure that we think about the broader definition of flourishing, which includes feeling good. That's important, but that's not everything. It includes feeling engaged, having rich relationships, having a sense of meaning and purpose, and achieving. Those are all important. That in positive psychology, we talk about the theory of well-being, and those are the five drivers of well-being and ultimate fulfillment. So it's not that I expect people to feel joyous every single day. In fact, a lot of the book is talking about how to not be happy, because I think the key to actually being fulfilled and happy at work is knowing how to not be happy, in a good and healthy way. And so that's what we explore is how do you deal with setbacks? How do you return to what's important, even when you're doing everything right and it all goes wrong?
Yeah, yeah. And so in your personal story, and you talk about this a lot in the book, and wow, I feel like it keeps coming up a lot in my own life, with my friends and with my colleagues. And in particular, I'm hearing it and seeing it a lot with women, is that, you know, so many of us have kind of achieved this definition of success, or what we were told or taught was success. And we get there and we're looking around and we're going, wait, this is all there is. I'm still not feeling happy. I've achieved all these things. I've done everything they told me to do, and I still feel unhappy. And so I guess, I talk a lot about kind of the redefinition of success and how that looks different for each of us. And so how do you talk about success in terms of like what makes us most happy?
Yes, that's a great question. I think we have to reverse engineer how we think about success. So most of us start off by thinking, this is what I want to achieve. And once I achieve it, then I'll be happy, right? Or this is what I want to earn. And those are all important goals. But first, what we have to define is how we want to feel and be. So it's less about earning, it's more about being. So do I want to feel creative? Do I want to feel connected with those I care about? Do I want to feel like I'm making an impact? So, really getting clear on the sensations and the quality of our experience. Because once you have a vision of who you are when your heart is singing, when you're seeing in technicolor, when you're feeling like you're using your strengths in just the right way, when the conditions are enabling you to be most powerful, when we're in that place, what we realize is that there's infinite ways for us to satisfy ourselves. And so I have an exercise called the Vision Generator, and you guys can grab it for free at visiongenerator.com. So it's totally free. You don't have to buy the book to do it, but I encourage you to buy the
But
book.
you should.
um, but what we do is we first focus on, like, people, when I coach people, a lot of times they come to me and they're like, I don't know what I want. And I actually say to them, yes, you do. You know how you want to feel. You know how you want to be. So we first define that, and then we choose goals or jobs or roles or responsibilities that enable you to be that way. So we're just flipping the sequence.
Yeah. So, I seemingly simple, but deceptively hard to just flip the sequence, because it, in many ways, I feel like goes against what we've been taught or told our whole life.
Oh, totally. I have people who get mad at me when they do this exercise, and I was one of them. Just like because for I grew up in an immigrant family, and it was very all about being practical and making sure you could put a roof over your head. So I
Mm,
was always told to not dream, too big, to make sure everything was doable and achievable. And when that gets lodged into you, it's hard to give yourself permission
yeah.
to pull back and think more freely and actually attune to what is your truth versus what's your family's or society's or your peers. So, but in the exercise, it's really a fill in the blank. So I try to make it as easy as possible. And also I talk about it as an imagination massage because so often we are very tense and tight and our sense of what's possible has become constricted. So I talk about how, sometimes we have to massage our sense of what's possible and work out those kinks. And sometimes it takes a few rounds. So it's a work in progress, and that's okay.
Now I want to go get a massage.
No, me
And just a reminder, thanks, Anne. I know you put it in the chat, but for people that have questions for Stella, please put them in the chat throughout and we can answer them throughout. But obviously, also as we get towards the end, we can open up and answer some questions. So, Stella, in your book, you talk about 8 skills, but before we get there, as I was reflecting on our conversation today, I was wondering, the World Happiness Report actually just recently came out last week or the week before. And, in particular, the US dropped out of the top 20 for the first time ever. And then even perhaps more upsetting for those of us that care about those stats is that, our children, our kids, people under the age of 30, are the 62nd kind of least happy in the world, behind, people in Ukraine and Israel and other parts of the world where there are, extreme, things going on, political, societal, etc. Yet in the US, our kids are very, very, very unhappy. So I kind of want to set that as a little bit of a foundation and then ask you, like, what do you think the state of happiness is generally, but more importantly, kind of the state of happiness at work? And when we look at the news, when we are constantly being bombarded with this news cycle of companies in kind of cutback mode, cost cutting mode, which doesn't feel humane in many regards. How do we overcome that?
Yeah, thank you
And
for
that was a loaded question. So
yeah, I was like, there's a lot. Um, so to first address the World Happiness Report. So since the 1950s in the United States, we can track a dramatic decrease in connectedness.
yeah,
We've seen that go down. Actually, it was since the introduction of the television. Since the introduction of the television, we have seen our sense of community decline in the United States. And as we know from the pandemic, where we have a staggering sense of loneliness. So before the pandemic, 25% of people reported having zero confidants. Now, some reports say 60% of Americans feel lonely. And our relationships are the biggest predictor of our happiness.
right.
And I know you know this, right? So, and I know we all know this in our bones. So we can weather tough times. We are dealing with really tough times, but we can deal with them if we're dealing with them together. The problem is that we feel very alone.
Mm.
And so the good news is that our sense of connectedness is one thing we can actually control. When I feel lonely, it's funny because when you feel lonely, the last thing you want to do is be vulnerable and reach out to a friend.
Yeah.
Because you feel like there's something wrong with you. But really, it's just a signal that it's time to connect. And so we have to override that instinct to isolate further, to pick up the phone, to connect in person, because our nervous systems are constantly speaking to each other. And that is one way we can tell our bodies that we're safe, is to be together. So I think the reason why we weren't even in the top 10 to begin
No.
with.
No.
So we've not been happy. It's not like we've dropped, but it's not been good news anyway. We've been flat and declining. So, and I think it's because we have prioritized work. We have let our careers move us from our families and friends. And that really impacts our well-being and our happiness. So how can we reprioritize our relationships, I think is really going to be a big answer to everything. And of course, with our youth, social media is what sociologists call social snacking.
Yeah.
We are starved for connection. There's only so many vending machine snacks we can go to. And it might take the edge off, but it won't actually be nutritive. It won't fill us up. So we have to really connect. And what's interesting too with some studies that have come out is that it's not just our strong ties that matter, like the people that we're most close
Right.
to. We also need a diversity in our social diet, just like we need all our vegetables and our grains and our whatever. We also need weak ties. We also need to like connect with the Uber driver or the barista or the person who's, our neighbor down the street, because that makes us feel like we're connected in a community. And I think oftentimes we're so in our phones that we don't really take the moment to see every interaction as a possible opportunity for like social nourishment.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
love that. And there's a comment in the chat from Kelly. I wonder if people feel lonely because of their jobs because they are working from home, or is there another reason behind it? And this is a very, very hot topic right now. So I definitely have some perspectives, but I would love to hear from you on that.
well, we have seen during the pandemic that the people who felt more burnt out were those working remotely. Um, and I I think that makes it a lot harder to get social connection. Although there is a study that points to us that, oh my God, this is what happens when your toddler wakes you up at 3 in the morning. You can't remember the
Okay,
research.
there's a study. It'll come back to you,
There's
but
a study, but it
there's always
basically,
a study.
uh, so it took two groups of participants at the base of a hill.
Mm.
One group of participants stood with a friend by their side. One group of participants stood alone. And the researchers asked them, can you tell me how steep this hill is? What's the degree of this slant? And folks who were standing with a friend by their side consistently estimated the hill to be less steep.
Mm.
So when we have a friend by our side, our perception of objective reality changes. We see the mountain as less steep. We see the challenge as less challenging. So they repeated this study with people both standing alone, two groups standing alone, but one group just imagined having a friend by their side. So they just visualized social support and they saw the same effect. So even when we're not physically together, if we can mentally visualize our social support, if we can embody that, if we can remind ourselves of how supported we are, we can take that edge off too. So that's that requires effort, but it's possible. But I think very simply, yes, being home alone will
Yeah.
make.
Yeah. And I would just to add on to that, I think that there's always a need for human interaction in the workplace. And I would love to see many more of our C-suite leaders and those that are trying to get people to go back to an office for a couple of days a week, a full week, whatever it is. I think it's unfortunate that the messaging is around productivity and not around human connection, because I think that if we celebrated human connection a little bit more, people might actually be more inclined to want to go back to the office, but we're making it all about, productivity and kind of the bottom line, and don't talk much about the benefits to the human in that. So just Jen's view of the world.
Yeah, I love Jen's view of the world. And it also when we have a good friend at work or we have those relationships, we're more engaged and we are more
100%.
productive and it's more healthy and all of that. So I'm with Jen's view of the world.
Yeah. Love it. Well, thank you, Kelly, for that comment. I want to get in, Stella, because you do specifically cover kind of these inner skills, these 8 skills for anyone that kind of wants to take control of their career, improve their happiness, satisfaction, engagement. So I want you to walk us through what those 8 skills are
Oh, sure, sure.
and also why they're so important.
So the more good news is that like being happy at work is not just a matter of luck. It is a matter of skill, which we can all learn. So that's the good news. And I call these skills inner skills because hard skills have to do with the task at hand. Can you do the job? Soft skills have to do with how we relate to one another and build trust and communicate. Inner skills have to do with how we relate to ourselves. So each of these skills are about really mastering yourself. And that's what I believe is the next frontier in the future of work. And I think that aligns with all that you're about too, Jen. So the first skill is about resilience. And that's about how do you manage your mind and mood when things go off track. The second skill is about knowing your unique vision of success. It's about having clarity of what that is and who you are when your heart is singing so
Mm.
that you can align your roles and responsibilities and your choices every day towards that. The third is about purpose, and that's articulating your values, knowing how to make decisions with confidence, and knowing how to make each day matter. Uh, I want to like keep going on each of these chapters because they're all so important, but I'll just list them out and then we can go in with. Then we talk about boundaries to prevent burnout. Then we talk about chapter 5 is about play, and I talk about our instinct to play and how that can help us renegotiate our relationship with uncertainty. Uh, then I talk about difficult conversations and how we can, the most difficult conversation we have to have is actually with ourself
Yeah.
first. And how do we approach those conversations and shift our energy so that we can actually transform the dynamic? And then finally, it's the final skill is called refocus. And that's about returning to what matters. That's about trust. That's about having a big picture view of 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 life and of setbacks. And it's actually about cultivating what I call post-traumatic growth, which is growing through really hard times.
Yeah, yeah. So I know all the skills are important, but are there any one or two that's like more important than the others?
I will tell you the one that really I'll tell you the two because I think I'm constantly working on them, especially. But this one incited a primal scream for me in the car when I was writing this chapter, which is the last chapter called
Mm,
Refocus. So it was originally called Focus because that's what it is in my coaching program. Because this was a coaching program before I wrote the book,
okay.
and I thought, okay, this is all about achieving your goals. And ironically, I couldn't finish this chapter. I kept writing it over and over again. And I remember one day I was like, okay, I'm going to go into the cafe. I have 2 hours. I'm going to edit this chapter and then I'm going to be done. And at the end of that 2 hours, I was exactly where I started. I didn't move beyond the first paragraph. And I went into my car and I screamed. And I, I just like, I was so pissed off at myself. And then I thought, okay, what is this? What is the message here, Stella, for you? Because there is some message in this resistance. And when I was driving, I realized that the message was about not pushing. It
Mm,
was not, it was about not grinding. And that message felt more important to me to share than achievement or getting your goals done. And when I stepped back and when I asked that question, like, what is this resistance here to show you? Uh, that unlocked this chapter, but that also was this meta experience of writing this whole book because it took me 9 years. And there were so many moments where I was pushing, and it felt like the universe was like pushing me down. And I reluctantly had to stay down and be like, it's not the right time. I want it to be the right time. And I kept getting back up and I kept pushing, but it wasn't the right time. And I felt like there's the this chapter is about how do you stay down and get the message you need to get so that you can really let life reveal the goodness of this moment. And so I know I probably am, I'm way more articulate when I write it, but
Yeah.
um, I I think that even when we're doing everything right, if it doesn't work out, it just hasn't worked out yet, and there's something even better in it for us. We just might not see it yet. And so that chapter is about how do you trust and how do you let go and how do you hold the space for something more beautiful to emerge. So that one was,
Well,
I'm still learning.
yes, I think a lot of us are nodding and saying, "Okay, Stella, please tell us how to stay down when it's the last thing we want to do."
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
what are those specific skills?
Yeah. And there's a list of questions to help you see those setbacks as setups for
Yeah,
something more wonderful. And I had, I had this journey with my mother getting ovarian cancer, and then me realizing I had the BRCA1 mutation, and then IVF not working out, and all these like losses and things like that. And but just always through this whole journey, just realizing that I was being held and supported. And there's a lot of beauty in life, and just to instead of wrestle so much, I'm getting better at wrestling less and allowing more. But I think that's a practice for us all.
and do you feel like that is one of the skills that people struggle with the most?
I think in our society here in, if we say in the Western world,
Yeah,
we do struggle with that. We're so all about getting things done. And like you said, productivity.
yeah.
Um, and so sometimes that's not the answer, and stillness is the answer, or allowing things to unfold.
But our
Um,
society doesn't reward us for being still.
yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't reward us, but life does reward
It
us.
does reward you. What about and this is an area I know you talk a lot about, I talk a lot about, and all of us struggle with is boundaries, especially for overachievers or high achievers. Setting boundaries, saying no often feels bad or like the wrong thing to do. But not saying no or setting boundaries most of the time for most of us leads to burnout. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, this was another one of those special chapters that had
Yeah.
me. And I go into the book on why, for me particular, and for many people who I would say I'd like to say I'm a recovering people pleaser, um, but a lot of us develop people pleasing tendencies because of trauma in childhood, which could be just having parents that were busy and stressed out and maybe didn't acknowledge your feelings, or it could be people who were in abusive situations, or there's a number, I mean, trauma is so common. And oftentimes what children will do is subsume their own feelings to and be in and appease their caregivers in order to stay attached and safe. So that's called fawning. And fawning and people pleasing can certainly lead to burnout. And if setting boundaries feels wrong to you, it's not because there's something wrong with you. And it's also not because setting boundaries is bad. It's just because it's new. And your nervous system, potentially, if this resonates, is not wired to feel safe when someone else is disappointed. And so it can feel really off in your body. But that's just because we need practice to rewire ourselves. And that is a matter of practice. And we can rewire ourselves. We do have neuroplasticity. Our brain can change. Um, so that is something I'm also on the path for, and I've gotten so much better, and there is hope. Um, and so what I say when it comes to saying no is that one way to reframe it is saying no is actually saying yes to something more important, right? And so we just have to know what that important thing is. And that's why we start with the vision and the values, because
Yeah,
that
and
sort of,
that reframing changed everything for me. That it, because I am one of those people that has a hard time saying no. And so the second I reframed it to be like, oh wait, it means I'm actually saying yes to this. It felt a lot easier to say no to those other things when I was able to look at it from a different lens. So I think that as simple as that sounds, it can be life changing for people that have a hard time saying no or not wanting to disappoint each other, other people, especially people that we care about.
yeah, yeah, I feel that same way. Yeah. So, and I'd say that it's, if the boundary doesn't work out or if you later regret it, I just encourage folks to return with self-compassion as like, I'm practicing something new, and to acknowledge that as progress, like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm making progress. I'm learning how to set boundaries. And
Giving yourself some grace.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Carla, I see that you came off mute. Do you have a question for us? Oh, you didn't mean to come off mute. I didn't mean to call you out there. All good, all good. So like I love to kind of get into some of the like nitty-gritty, and there's like so much in your book, right? But for people that haven't yet read your book, like what are some things that they can start to do today, tomorrow, the next day that will support, more happiness, more fulfilling, kind of put them on the path to developing these inner skills.
Yeah, well, one thing I encourage, and this is what helped me when I was feeling really miserable working in advertising, I took a complaint vacation. So complaining is not just about noticing what's wrong, it's about the suffering of what's wrong. So I just remember telling myself, because I was tired of hearing my own complaining all the time.
Mm.
And I knew that my boyfriend at the time was tired of it, and everyone was like tired of it, and our loved ones are tired of it. So I told myself, as an experiment, what would happen if I just abstained from complaining about this for a week? And I coupled that with just noticing what was right. So it's not about ignoring what's wrong, but it's about the suffering of what's wrong. It's like, oh, it's raining outside today, or like, oh yeah, it's raining outside, right? So so everyone knows this. Gratitude is so basic. We all know it. I call it the boring basics in the book. We all know these things, but we just have to do them. But if you could, the simple thing, abstain, give yourself like, just play with it for 1 week, abstain from complaining, and write down 3 things that you're grateful for every day, or even better, kick off a meeting this way. Or before you go to bed, if you have a partner in your life, share that, or around the dinner table, and just notice what is good. Maybe we can even do that here together right now.
I
If
love that.
if
In the
everybody,
chat.
yeah, in the chat, share your 3 things. that you are grateful for right now? I will share one. I am so grateful to be with you all. And thank you so much for organizing. And Jen, it is an honor. I admire your work so much. And for everyone that showed up, I'm so, so grateful that you are here and that this book is done. So thank you.
That's a big one. This book is done. I know how that feels, and I think you know how that feels. That's a big and I think while people are adding things in the chat, for me, one of the greatest things about gratitude, I think it's very powerful to do a gratitude exercise for yourself, just kind of sitting and reflecting on what you're grateful for. What makes gratitude even more powerful is when you share it with someone else, because not only do you get the benefit of it, they get the benefit of it too. And so, Stella, you sharing your gratitude about being here, being with us, that benefited you, but it also benefited all of us. And I think that that's like, it doesn't cost anything, it doesn't take a lot of time. It's so underutilized and underrated in terms of like how easily accessible it is for all of us. I think we kind of tend to forget it, especially when we end up in that complaint loop, which I'm guilty.
We're all guilty. That's how we're wired. Um, but I love when I'm reading everyone's
I
gratitude.
know, this is awesome.
Um, Grateful to be alive, the quiet rain, the miracles, Carla says, the brilliance of community and having the ability to run. My sweet little fuzzy affectionate cat, says Nicole. Like all of these, I can feel like my heart melting as I'm reading your gratitude. And that's the thing is these, I give presentations all the time to organizations, and the tools often take less than 60
Yeah.
seconds for us to shift our mood. It doesn't take a lot for us to nudge ourselves towards more optimism and hope and positivity.
Yeah, I love that. So, one of the things that you said about gratitude is, opening a meeting with gratitude. And so that kind of got me thinking about some of the research that probably many of us have seen, but that managers, our direct managers or leaders, and have the biggest impact, you as a leader or manager, on those that work for you, and your leader or manager on your health and well-being. Some studies say that our direct leader has as big of an impact on our mental health as our partner or spouse does,
Yeah.
which is pretty scary, honestly. So, as for those of us that are people leaders and managers, what can we do differently to, I mean, obviously we've talked about a lot about these skills, but are there specific things that we can do as managers and leaders to help cultivate more happiness on our teams and at work?
Oh, I love that. I think again, this is so basic, but showing that you care,
Hmm.
showing that you care about them as a human. So very basic, very human, but I've had to like write guides for how to check in with your employees. And so just asking them, how are you? How was your weekend? Um, how is this project feeling for you? Right. So just very simple check-ins on the regular to show that you care. Tell me one good thing as you kick off a meeting, right? But then there's also caring about their development. So showing that you're not just using them for getting work out of them, but also that you're there for them. So in whatever format works, but let's think about your career and tell me, what do you hope to get out of this role? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? How might I support you in doing that? So often we don't create space to really hear people's true passions, and they feel afraid to actually let you know. So showing them that you care. And then also finally to give regular, consistent, full feedback. Sometimes managers just give good feedback and
Mm.
they fail to tell people how they could do even better. Or it's the opposite. They're just telling them the constructive feedback and they're forgetting to actually be specific about how they're doing well. And I find either can be really devastating, especially to overachievers. Especially overachievers want to hear, how can I do even better? And then if people are doing well and they don't hear that, they can really start to self-destruct and feel like they're not in the right place.
Yeah, and I think feedback is such an important topic that I think all of us can regularly do a better job on. And I think about, some of the work of Brene Brown when she talks about clear is kind, right? And so often we don't, or we shy away from giving that constructive feedback because we don't want to appear as being unkind or upset someone. But that's not really what kindness is, right? Kindness is actually being clear and direct and helpful and delivering it in a way that empowers and inspires someone. And that's a skill set. That's really, really hard.
Exactly. It is hard. It really is hard. And I think that, again, starting with that difficult conversation from
Yeah.
within, it's like, what's holding me back? Is it because
Hmm.
I'm afraid of upsetting this person? But if I'm really being of service to them, then what's the most noble action for me to take?
Yeah, I love that. So we have about 5 minutes left. If there are others with questions, please, please put them in the chat. I know, Anne, you had a question for Stella on what your hope for this book is.
Oh, thank you.
I love that question.
That is a really good question that I've been asking myself too. Um, um, my number one hope when I wrote it was to bring awareness to the fact that these skills are learnable and that these skills are are critical for that next frontier. And this kind of goes back to one of your questions, Jen. Um, we've been disengaged at work since Gallup has been measuring engagement.
Hmm.
Like 2/3 of employees are disengaged and have been. And we've been burnt out even before the pandemic. And I think no matter how much money we stuff into training and engagement, unless we all can take responsibility for ourselves and know how to do that, we're going to keep maintaining those levels.
Yeah.
I do think organizations have to play their role, but we have to do it together also as individuals. And so my greatest hope is that we learn how to really be in our power, because when we do that, we're not just helping ourselves, but we're helping everyone around us. And it just becomes this beautiful exponential unleashing of potential.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that is a mic drop moment, and I will end us unless there are any final questions that come in. I will end us on one final question for you. If there's one thing that you want people to do differently after listening to our discussion today, what would it be? Other than go buy your book.
Ah. Mhm. Well, can I give you two? I think one is to be quiet,
Mm,
because it's so hard with social media and news and everything. Just to be quiet. Maybe this is advice I'm giving to myself right now because I
and
could
me.
and and also to be together. So
Mm,
if we can do both of those, I think we'll be okay.
yeah, on that note, Anne, I feel like I should turn it back to you on Be Together.
I'm so grateful for this conversation today. Everything that you two have been talking about, I've been taking notes. I've been like cheering you on in the chats. I um I feel so honored. I feel so grateful for the two of you bringing your brilliance to this conversation. I've been really leaning into the power of togetherness and the ways in which we can really I've been focused on this wedge of loneliness and the ways that people are lonely at work and the ways in which they feel supported and seen and successful when they come together. And so this was really, you two really modeled this of how we can support each other and come together to make this book an even bigger book in the world. There's so many amazing people. I dropped a link into the chat to buy your book. I also dropped a link in about our new program of 10 minutes to togetherness and more about the list. Because I really feel like this was an audience that was really picking up what you were putting down. So I appreciate you both today, for your time and your energy and all of your brilliance. And I thank you all for joining us. Come back again another time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Anne.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Stella.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Take care.